I am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. He's the author of several books, no other than Mr. J.V. Hilliard.
Hey, thank you very much for having me, Daniel. I appreciate your time this evening.
Yes, my pleasure, Mr. J.V. And can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. So, my name is JV Hilliard. I am an epic fantasy and dark fantasy author. My series is known as the Realm of Warminster series. It is a four-book series. Books one and two are already currently available in e-format, hardback, paperback, or if you want to download an audiobook, they're available there too. The third book comes out next week in the series, and the last will come out around the holidays here in 2023. So, getting close to the final installment. I'm pretty excited about it.
Congratulations, Mr. Javi. More books to come.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. They don't end. They've been flowing for a while.
That'd be awesome. So, what age did you realize that you are good in writing?
I started it when I was very young. I was in fourth or fifth grade. My uncle was paralyzed when he was in the military, and he was like a second father to me. I grew up in his room, and my mom was his nurse. And to be fair, he was very limited in what he could do. And one of the things he could do was write. That was a form of escapism for him, and it was something I kind of emulated when I'd sit in his room, and he was sort of like a teacher and a tutor. And so I got ahead of myself and many of my classmates because of his attention that he would pay to me. And one of the things we did together was write. So I started writing at a very young age and took to it, and I started doing it professionally. When I got out of college in a very specific communications package. I do a lot of government affairs work in Washington, and in particular with defense and technology companies. So I did a lot of technical writing for many years. And then when COVID happened, it gave me the opportunity to write something in fiction. So I had a chance to take those skills and turn it into something that became what I thought was going to be a single book and kick something off the bucket list that turned really into a series and now a career.
Yes, definitely. It's a career. So, who are your favorite authors?
I'm a big fan of fantasy adventure novels. So the high fantasy folks like Tolkien, or if you really get a fine point on it, I'm a big Dungeons and Dragons guy. So I like Margaret Weiss and R.A. Salvatore, Tracy Hickman, of course, Terry Brooks, and a few others like Terry Pratchett and Brandon Sanderson, folks like that I read. Sarah Moss, most recently, more contemporary for the kind of stuff that I like. But I do write some dark fantasy stuff, and so the gothic appeals to me. So I've really done some deep reads of things like Bram Stoker, Mary Shelley, a few others that are in that space that kind of came from that era too, and I kind of blend them when I write. So it's not like you're getting just a straight up sword and sorcery adventure when you read my novels. You really get kind of a blend of my love for the gothic mixed with traditional fantasy.
Ah, interesting indeed, Mr. JV. So, if you describe the writing of your favorite authors, what are they?
So I would describe, if I would choose R.A. Salvatore as probably my favorite author to read, and in part, I think it's because we write very similarly. I think we're both former, and I'm still a current Dungeons and Dragons player, and many of our passages are written in the form that you might see that came from the lips of a dungeon master, someone who was taking a party and leading them through a role playing adventure. And so naturally, those descriptions are very rich, and they often go deep. And so, I think his descriptions of his battle scenes and a lot of the scenes that he writes are very similar to mine. In fact, I would even suggest that I emulate his writing in that style as well. I think that yeah, if you were looking at Margaret Weiss, I think she's another that has sort of like a more of a what I would describe as a high fantasy flair to her. She reminds me more of a Tolkien author than Salvatore. Salvatore is much more gritty, and what I would describe as his battle scenes are second to none. Where Weiss, you fall in love with the world of Kryn. You fall in love with her characters. They all have these sort of deep and really identifiable traits to them that allow you to kind of fall in love with them. And you hate to see when bad things happen to them because they don't all survive in all the books. And the same thing for the Dark Elf trilogy for Salvatore. And so I think when I look at those two as contemporaries, I look at them and say that's kind of what I want my novels to be like. Although I would have to say the granddaddy of them all is Tolkien, right? That is the end all be all, the first one. If it were not for J.R.R. Tolkien, there wouldn't be a fantasy genre. And he writes in that epic fantasy style that I like to write in, where Salvatore and Weiss, although I would consider them epic fantasy, they're also episodic in the sense that you're following along the same group of party adventurers that you would find in a D&D campaign, where Tolkien was so much more broad, and that's what I've tried to do. I've created my own form of coats of arms for my families. There's a nobility. You could find basically a flow chart and a family tree of things. I've developed several maps, including some close-ups of maps, things that you would, as an epic fantasy author or a game player, would enjoy. So I've tried to incorporate things from Tolkien as well.
How did you modify your writing from the writing of Mr. Tolkien?
So, he speaks in a different style, right? Like he's got that old English Oxford kind of flair to him, which endears many readers to it. It's almost become the default language. You expect to see that even when you see adaptations in things like movies or TV shows. They're always, many of them have British accents. Many of them are set in sort of like a medieval or a Renaissance era setting with magic, and it's always usually Northern or Middle European or Scandinavian. Mine's a little different than that. I think that what I've tried to do is find inspiration from all around the globe, and I write in a very contemporary way. Although I do think I write rich and perhaps even sometimes dense, like he does, getting into details that maybe contemporary writers wouldn't dare to do. I love doing that, so it makes it. I think it really fits my realm. When you try to world build, it's hard not to do that when you're describing what you want your readers to see. In some cases, readers like to go and fill in the holes on their own. But in the case of Tolkien, I think where I stray away from him a little bit is my language is a lot more contemporary. It's going to be easier to read for folks that find reading that old English style, that Oxford style of writing. A little harder. This is going to be something that a young adult or an advanced YA reader in the States or in the UK or in Australia would be able to pick this up and identify with it right away. I try to stay true to the genre while also writing in a voice that's familiar to me.
Yes, very well said, Mr. JV. So, what are your short term goals and long term goals in writing?
Yeah, so short term for me is I'd love to finish this series. It'll be completed by the end of 2023. And based on its popularity, I've licensed the intellectual property of the novels to an augmented reality and virtual reality gaming company to create games that will be released in late 2024 and 2025. So I think as a short-term goal, that's something I'd like to see come to fruition and succeed. I'm also in the process of adapting uh, the books into a series of graphic novels, and I'm working with a group out of Florida right now to do some of the illustrations, and one gentleman out of San Francisco that's kind of started it through some fan art that he put together. But that's something I hear a lot about when I'm at book signings and conventions, is that folks think that, the way that I write, it's easily translatable into graphic novels, and so I really like those. And I think those are the two things that are very near term. On the long term, there's going to be another series on the back end of this. I think I've left the fourth book to some degree open ended. Many storylines converge and end like they should there, but then I think that, based again on the popularity and some of the feedback I've gotten, there's going to be at least another three beyond that. But what I'd like to do is, before I get into that next series, I've had some requests to do shorter novellas, almost origin stories of some of the more popular characters, even some that, I've got to be honest with you, I didn't think were that popular. They were almost side characters in many respects, and I get a great deal of response from folks when I'm out in the public about them. And so what I'd like to do is offer, shorter novellas to kind of give a peek behind the curtain to where these characters come from, and a little bit more detail on them, so that those more popular characters can be learned and loved by many, as opposed to just having read the series. You'll be able to pick these up and read them as standalones, and that'll buy me a little bit of time to get into that long-term goal of the next series. So it's really kind of taken on its own momentum, and I'm excited about the direction that it's headed, and I hope that answers your question.
Yes, indeed, Mr. JV. But before we go on, I want to shout out to the people listening. According to my tops ranking in the last 30 days, according to my Apple chart, in Zambia, I got number 8 on an Apple chart. Egypt at number 31, Mongolia at number 34, Pakistan at number 44, Cameroon at number 73, Canada 135, United Arab Emirates at 148. Libya at 164, United Kingdom at 167, Algeria at 188, Vietnam at 204, Georgia at 206, Jordan at 236. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast, because this podcast is created to empower writers all over the world, like Mr. Jevi Hilliard. So, Mr. Javi, let's talk about the book one, The Last Keeper of the Warminster series.
Sure. So book one is exactly what you would expect. It's an origin story of several of the main characters in it. There is a typical trope that you might see in a lot of fantasy novels, where you get this sort of chosen one versus the false prophet. And in the prologue, and in chapter one of the novel, you see this rivalry beginning between Grey Taurus the Mad, who is a fallen keeper, and his budding rival, Damus Alaric, who is trying to just learn his powers and harness them to be able to defeat him. And of course, Damus at the time doesn't know that he's being hurtled into this chaotic future, but it's with his powers of foresight, something that he can see the future in his dreams, something called onoramancy. And he has that power to do that, and he sees the return of this fallen keeper coming to take revenge on the cathedral. And that's sort of where the book kicks off. But there's a couple of other characters. There's a female lead in Princess Adeline Elspeth, who is of the Vermilion Nation. It's a cast of elves that are named by the color of their hair and the color of their eyes, this vermilion red. And she's sent forth to stop this oncoming catastrophe, and starts to fall in love with a lowborn raven elf named Sir Ritter of Vulcaneer, who she falls in love with, based on some of his heroism, and he falls in love with her. And there's another one of these kind of tropes that play into it, where you've got this forbidden love, and in her case, she's forbidden bound by duty as a noble not to fall in love with a sort of a peasant knight, and he has a duty to his kingdom, in this case his barony, to protect the borders, even if it means sacrificing his budding love for her. And so you get a little romance in there. In book one, you get a lot of action. I do a lot of world building. So if you're a fan of the fantasy genre, you're going to see some really unique places. You're going to see some unique monsters that you're not going to have seen. Sure, there are some familiarities if you're a Dungeons and Dragons person or a Tolkien person. You're going to see humans and elves and other cast of characters you might recognize, but I've tried to make it as unique and as mine as possible, and so I've had a good time doing that. So when you read about the Antlered Man, or you read about the Tetrine, which is this breed of black unicorns, or you read about some of the other monsters that they have to face down and fight, including some of the villains in the novel, I think you're going to find them unique to the realm of Warminster. You're going to find the realm of Warminster unique among those other realms within the fantasy genre. And I hope you enjoy the character building in book one. And I know down the road we'll get into books 2, 3, and 4, but that's really what you're looking for in The Last Keeper. So if you're a big fan of action, you like magic, and you like new, unforeseen characters and monsters, you're really going to like The Last Keeper.
Yes. So The Last Keeper, how did you crafted it?
Yeah, so I crafted it over the course. This is a strange story. When COVID happened, I had nothing to do. My job and work and travel were closed down for almost over a year and a half. And my wife, said to me, "You're not sitting around doing nothing." Because she knew I'm one of these energy bunnies, and so she had to put me to work. And there was only so many rooms you could paint and things you can clean. So I literally just sat down and said, I'm going to take this off my bucket list, and I'm going to write this fantasy novel that's been living in me for 20 years. And I did it, and I shared it with a friend of mine who's an associate professor at a community college, and she said, you really have something here. And she helped me edit it, and we sent it on to a development editor, who then sent it on to a publisher, and the rest is history. It turned from a single novel into a series, which is typical for fantasy novels. And the way I write, I hear that there's two types of authors. There's the planner, who plots everything out, and then there's the pantser that flies by the seat of their pants and and writes, just can sit down and start writing. I am a prototypical plotter. Like, everything I do is plotted out, and in my den I've got this whiteboard, and it looks almost like a crime scene, with all of these arrows and different plot lines intersecting and things. But for me, it keeps me and my plots together. I have a tendency to write backwards, and what I mean by that is I'll write the ending of the novel and then go back to the beginning and finish that, and then fill in the middle. Almost reverse engineering my way to where I want it to be, so that I know that everything that's on my whiteboard and my walls is fit into my novel. I'm not missing anything, and then that helps me plan for the next novel, the next novel, and the next novel. So, that's sort of my process behind it, and how I crafted it. And really, where it came from was the silver lining in COVID allowed me the time to write a novel that I never would have, and now it's transformed me into the next stage of my career.
Yes, very well said, Mr. Gravy. And according to Tommy, intriguing. What are the elements that you put in the story that your readers saying that it's really intriguing novel?
So, from the feedback that I get when at a book signing or at a library or an author event, or I'm giving a speech, has been really in three directions. The first is, I write in multiple points of view, so you see through the eyes of my main characters, but you also sometimes see, and it could be jarring to those who aren't used to reading it, but in epic fantasy there are multiple points of view, and I know that that's something that I get some feedback on, both positive and negative. But once they get through the first few pages, they get it, and they're like, all right, I can live with this. It bounces around, and so instead of it being a traditional book with a single point of view, they're looking at it almost like they're watching a TV show, where you can see through the eyes of many of the characters at the same time. And I think that they like that. And by books 2 and 3, I don't hear that anymore. Like, people are just into the style in which I write. But I think that the most intriguing spots are that, I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons for almost 20 years. And in that period, I've memorialized a lot of our um, best adventures, whether it was me as a player or me as a dungeon master. And these ideas are battle tested. So the monsters, I know what my beta readers, in this case, my players, liked and didn't like, because I could tell which enemies they hated the most, and those are the ones that I put into the novel, or those are the plot lines that I've developed around it. Now, they're not exactly the same like they used to be, so I have to twist them to fit, and frankly, I have to stay away from the D&D moniker at every point. I have no license there. So in creating my own world and doing that stuff, that's been fun for me, but it also is very familiar to those that play role-playing games. It's not whether you're a gamer and do video games, or whether you're a gamer and play, role-playing or live action role-playing. This is going to feel very familiar to you. So when you get into there, you're like, yeah, I get these characters. I've played one of them before. I know where this is going. And I think that, intrigues many. And then, of course, I have a pretty unique system for magic, which just starts to get explained in book 1. And it's derived from, a variety of legends and lore from around the world. I've borrowed from Scandinavian, I've borrowed from Native Americans, I've borrowed from some Asian cultures, and even an Egyptian culture, finding interesting monsters and fables and stories that haven't been used before. And I put my own twist on them. So I create these monsters, and I create this magic that is used in a little bit of a different way than you might see in a traditional sword and sorcery movie, or something like a Tolkien or Game of Thrones.
Yes. Wow. Game of Thrones. I love it. So, according to James Davidson, prepare for a thrilling journey through incredible places and things. So, what are the incredible places that you put in the story that your readers say are something else?
Well, I have a few. Like, I've created a city known as Abacus, and Abacus is a scholar city. And the reason I created it is I have a little bit of a pet peeve. As a big fan of fantasy, I'm also a fan of sci-fi. And one of the things I notice in almost all fantasy is there's never really any kind of technological innovation or invention. Or if it is, it's by way of example, we just mentioned Game of Thrones a few minutes ago. Jon Snow, who was the 999th, guardian on the wall, was still using a sword and shield, right? In Tolkien, they have thousands of years between, the Sauron and the Bilbo and Frodo, and they're still on horses and, with swords and shields again. Abacus is a place where you see some invention, and it's my way of putting just a little bit of sci-fi into a fantasy realm, which I think satisfies my sci-fi readers, but also, allows me to supercharge some plot lines and help the good guys every now and then. And so there'll be technologies that are lifted from Abacus that, I look at it as sort of the James Bond character Q, where they just create something just in time that works out very well for that adventure. And I think that gives a little bit of a spin, and it is kind of unique. I haven't seen that in anywhere else in my genre. So I enjoy doing that. I think that's a way of showing some level of advancement, some level of innovation. And I think on the other side, and almost the other side of the realm in this case, you get the Dragon Breaths Mountains. It is exactly what you expect when you start to read a novel. It's this mountain that is shrouded in this fog, and old legend and lore says that the fog is really the breath of a dragon, and it's creating this sort of smoke that lies low, in there. And that's where all the cryptids live, right? That's where all these crazy creatures come from that are going to cause problems for Sir Ritter and Adeline and eventually Damis as the book, kind of goes on. And the last thing I'll mention is, I have a school called the Cathedral of the Watchful Eye, where all of these prophets and oracles go to learn how to harness their power. They worship a god named Erud who, gives them this power of this sight. In the same way, a maester may have a power of knowledge in Game of Thrones and Westeros. These guys have the power bestowed upon them by the gods, who I call the ancients, and they drop this knowledge on them in the form of fortune telling. So sometimes they're learning how to read cards or bones. Other times they're looking into a mirror or a pool of water. And in Damas's case, he sees the future when he dreams, in the same way that a modern day Edgar Casey may have done. And his job is to learn how to interpret those things. And this cathedral acts as a school for these keepers, and then they're sent off to counsel kings and queens and emperors and empresses around the realm of Warminster in the hopes of giving them the right counsel so they do the right things for their kingdoms and their queendoms and whatever else. And so, I think that there's a lot of that kind of world building that folks are going to like, and it's stuff that I haven't seen in other places. So, I'm hoping that that folks continue to enjoy it the way that they've been responding to it so far, is that they like it. So I'm going to continue to give them more and more of it.
Yes, very well said, Mr. JV. So, what is your trademark that you put in the novel that every people can remind you that is for you, Mr. JV?
Yeah. So there's always a epic battle scene, right? Like something that you haven't seen anywhere else. At the end of book two, there's a battle scene between two snipers that have longbows, and when they shoot their longbows at each other while they're running, in an effort to save one another. And I'm not going to get into it because we're not talking about book two tonight. Something happens in a very William Tellish kind of fashion, something that I haven't seen read, I haven't seen it on TV, and things like that. And the same thing in book three, you're going to see battle scenes that I've borrowed inspiration from real life, things that come from my amateur military historian background, and I've woven it into a fantasy story. So there are these little innovations that'll give the good guys a little bit of an advantage. So in the naval battle, they're using quicklime, which is something that really happened, during the time of pirates and things like that in the 14th, 15th, 16th centuries. But you don't read about them a lot. Or you'll see the advent of the arquebus and some other things too that'll give some folks a little bit of an advantage. And these hippogriffs that fly down and drop these little bombs on folks that have riders on them. I think those are the kind of things that I've innovated to give my bad guys an air force in a time where there were no air forces. So I think that kind of stuff is fun, and I enjoy doing it.
Yes, so the Last Keeper. What is the best highlight?
So for me, it's the end. I hate to say it, and I'm gonna. There's no spoiler here, but let's just say there's a really solid cliffhanger ending, and I did that in a way I didn't expect it. When I wrote it and I submitted it to my editor, he came back and he literally said, "This is where this book needs to end. Cut these two chapters out and throw them into book two. It has to end here because people will be so mad and love the fact at the same time that you created a sort of this like storybook hit, hanging ending, that they're going to want to go out and buy book two right away and get into it." And so I took his advice, and I get that a lot where people are mad at me for doing it, but then they can't wait to get into book two. So his advice was spot on, and for that I owe him a debt of gratitude. It's my favorite part of book one, as sad as that is, because that's a little bit of a cheat. Yes, it's the end, but it's a very powerful ending, and it leaves you shocked and wanting more.
Oh, interesting, Mr. JV. But before we go on, I'm inviting you to listen to my other podcast, Food 101, on our third season with Chef Alessandro, one of the best executive chef in one of the best restaurant in downtown Toronto. So please do listen. Food 101. Our latest episode, we talk about semi-Fredo, people, because it's hot, hot, hot in the summer. It help you to refresh and, let's say, give your dessert more another taste. So please do listen. Food 101. Plus one more. Our Food 101 Volume 1 Basics is now available on Amazon and leading online bookstores worldwide. It's all about my 100 episodes of my first season of Food 101. It's all about the basic or fundamental that you need in the kitchen so that your food or whatever you are cooking will be delicious. So, Mr. JB, are you independent or traditional publishing?
I am traditionally published. My publisher is Canadian based, and her publishing house is called Dragon Moon Press. So if you like sci-fi, if you like fantasy, if you like dystopian literature, that's what she specializes in. If you can't tell by the name, it kind of says what it is. And and I've been working with her through this series, so having a great time doing it. And she's been, a heck of a lot of help to a guy who was a first-time author. And I chose that path because I really didn't know much about the industry, and I felt that I needed help to navigate the marketplace a little bit better. And as a result, sure, I could have soldiered through and done the indie thing, and I have a lot of friends that did, and I respect them for it. But I was looking for someone out there that knew a little bit more about the publishing industry and the current marketplace, and that's paid off for me. I've sold a bunch of books, and that's translated into a video game, that's translating into a graphic novel, and all of that being said, I wouldn't have been there without her. And frankly, my development editor, who is tremendous to work for out of the United Kingdom, and just really enjoy working with them both. And that's set me down a path I didn't expect, and went from a bucket list thing to an actual career because of it. So I'm really, really pleasantly surprised that it's as successful as it is, as early as it has been. But it's been great to work with her, and I enjoy the benefits of those traditional publishing assets that she has, like email lists, and just things like that. I might have taken a few years to build if I was an indie, and that was available to me right away as a published author.
So, do you think in the future you will be an indie author?
No, I think I like the traditional publishing route, right? What I'm doing now. I mean, I could go down that way, but I'm really enjoying this as a partnership, and it allows me to continue to learn and be part of an industry that look. I don't know it as well as she does, and for me to just kind of marshal along and follow what she's doing, I think has been helpful. Sure, I could go indie, but I don't have any desire to. I think the traditional publishing way is the way I'd like to stay.
Yes, definitely. What is your message for those aspiring authors that they want to publish their books? There's
So I would give them three bits of advice. The first is write every day. And what I mean by that is you don't have to write a novel every day. You don't even have to write a chapter every day. You can outline something. You can finish a chapter you couldn't get through the night before you slept on it. Make writing muscle memory. And so you'll literally feel guilty in the same way you feel guilty when you don't go to the gym, right? Like, oh, or you broke a diet. You feel like you let yourself down. That's what you should feel like when you don't write. Now, I'm not saying holidays and vacations, that everybody's entitled, but I'm saying that sort of feeling that you should do that. And that way, because I get a lot of that from folks that are first time authors. It's like, I can't break the inertia. Well, that's how you do it. You just write something, even if it's 2 sentences, write something and then return to it the next day and write something more. And that'll take care of itself. The second thing I would say to them is be open to constructive criticism. Don't be afraid to share your work. Share it not only with your publishers, but also share it with your editors with your friends, with folks that aren't going to just tell you it's the best thing they ever read. You need people to critique it in a way that you will get better. And iron sharpens iron. And you're not going to get that by giving it to your mom, who's of course going to love it and it'll be the best thing she's ever read. Instead, you got to get it to big readers, people that read in your genre, that understand your genre, so that they can tell you what they think, whether they like it or not. And there are going to be things that you can learn from that. And some of it's going to sting, and you're going to have to kill your darlings and you rewrite stuff and go back to the drawing board, but it will make for a better novel, and it'll make you a better writer. And the third thing that I'll throw into the mix is really learn how to use social media in a way that it's a tool that will promote you, and it's free, save for the time value of money that you've sunken into it. And what I mean by that is the only thing that costs is the time to get it set up and the time to build it. And that's something you're doing anyway. And these are places where you're going to sell your books, where you're going to promote your books, where you're going to get followers, you're going to build email lists. So use that social media stuff. And I'm going to throw a website in there as part of that, because it is, part of the internet marketing that I'm talking about. But whether it's Twitter, Facebook, Insta, TikTok, used at least 2 or 3 of those sources, if not more, to promote your stuff, because you're going to find people on Discord that you wouldn't find on Facebook, and you're going to find people on Facebook that you wouldn't find on Twitch, or you wouldn't find, as part of your YouTube channel. They don't watch those kind of things. You have to find those things and use it, because it's free, save for the time that you put into it. And know that you're going to have to do that to self-promote your books. Even if you have a publisher like I do, there's only this. Look, I'm not with one of the big 4 or 5 publishing houses out there that have got relationships with everybody. So I've reached out to a guy like you, through a system like Podmatch or Matchmaker that will help you get exposure through radio shows, TV shows, podcasts, things like that. Throw yourself into it. And it's through those methods that you'll find additional readers, and I think those are the 3 pieces of advice I'd leave any aspiring author with.
Yes, very well said, Mr. JV. So, the last keeper, what are your struggles in writing, right?
My struggles are, a few things, right? So obviously, for me, I have a hard time just sitting down and writing. I have to know the direction in which I'm writing, which is why I plan. So it's hard for me. Sometimes it'll take me a while to finish the plan for the next book. I just can't. I don't have that Stephen King in me where I can just sit down and stuff starts to flow. Like for me, if it starts to flow, it's going to go off the rails. I'm not going to know how to get it back on. So I am very regimented. I know where my weaknesses are, but I've made it a strength of mine, so that I think that my novels are better because of it. And I think that that's the writing style I've had to employ. The other side of it is really understanding that the inspiration of writing is going to hit you at any given time. You could be listening to music in your car, you could be sitting in a meeting and see something. Authors are very observant people, oftentimes shy and introverted, but they're observant. And what they'll do is you'll see a trait in somebody that you build into one of your characters because you thought it was unique, or the way someone reacts to something in real life. You want to capture that and use that as inspiration for one of your characters. And so, for me, I've had to learn to really kind of pay attention to those kind of things. And, I also keep a sort of like a log, whether you're doing it dictation on the phone, if you're in the car, or, you keep a document like I do that has ideas that are just floating around that you can revisit later on. And I think thirdly is just, keeping the energy level up. I think that, that's always a hard thing to do. I think every author struggles with it. Some struggle from what I would describe, or anybody would describe really, as writer's block. I don't have that because I've already planned my stuff out, right? I might have writer's block before I know where I'm going to go, but once I do, I'm already there. And what I would tell people that if you do hit that writer's block, reach out to other creatives. They don't have to even be writers. This has to be creative people, and you can sit down and talk to anybody, whether they're artists, whether they're a musician. It doesn't have to be an author, and even an author in your genre. Just sit down and talk with somebody, and they will throw ideas at you. So I've found my way into a couple of writers groups. Some of them are more broad, where I'm the only fantasy author within it. Others are deeper, where I've got like there are 4 or 5 fantasy authors within, and that way you're listening and you're learning. And so some of these groups I'm with, there's a woman who writes romance, and that's helped me be a better romance writer, even though that's not my genre. I can write that better in my genre. Other folks write at the YA or middle grade level, and you realize that a lot of the people that are fans of fantasy are that age, and so you're writing for that advanced young adult who's going to be a new adult that'll eventually grow into a full-fledged literature lover. And but you want to capture them at that age of 12 and 13, and so you've got to write for that that kind of advanced reader, things like that. And you just pick that up through that. And so I would encourage people to do that as well, because before that I didn't know what I was doing, and those groups helped me overcome some of those obstacles.
Okay, so The Last Keeper, as your debut novel, what did you learn from it?
Well, the first thing I learned is don't be afraid of starting over. There were some things in the novel that I had to just break down and rewrite, because once they hit my beta readers, or once they hit my editors, they had a lot of legitimate questions, and realized going into it, and I didn't know this, that your first draft is not the last draft. Your first draft is going to be your 4th or 5th draft by the time it's acceptable and ready to go to publication. So, part of that was a lesson learned, from just a functional level. It's like how the process worked. I didn't know what a copy editor was or what a development editor was until I got them, right? I didn't know that I needed to design my own cover, or I had how to find a publisher, and writing a query letter, and do I need an agent, and all the things that I didn't know for book 1 that I now know going into book 3s and 4. The second thing is, not every idea that you have survives, right? There are things that you can move into other novels. You can release it as sort of like, stories on the side. But even if you want it in there, sometimes it just doesn't fit. And I know there's a saying for that. They say sometimes you have to kill your darlings. That's 100% true. Sometimes there are things that you want to save, and you love a scene, but it just doesn't fit anymore after the 3rd draft, and it's just time for it to go. That was the lesson I think it was the hardest for me to learn, because you fall in love with your story, and all of a sudden you're asking me to cut something out, and it's like, wait, this is on the cutting room floor, and what am I going to do with it? And so eventually you just have to get over that and say, meh, it happens. It's a better novel without it.
Yes, very well said, Mr. JV. So, can you please invite our listeners to buy all your books?
Yeah, sure. So you can find my novels very simply. If you want to go to dragonmoonpress.com, you can find them there. You can also find them available almost ubiquitously these days. If you're an Amazon shopper, you can go to Amazon, buy them there. There's about 20 different distribution channels, like Apple Books or Barnes and Noble, or any of the other bookstores you might walk into. You'll likely find them there. If you're an ebook reader, it's downloadable in about 8 or 9 different ways to do that. If you like Apple Books like I do, or you've got your Nook or your Kindle, you'll be able to download it there. And then on the audiobook side, it's available on all the audiobook platforms. Most popular among them, places like Audible and Kobo and Apple and things like that as well. iTunes.
Mr. JV, thank you for your time.
It has been an absolute pleasure, and I appreciate the opportunity to come on the show.
Morning, people. See you soon.